What's up, everybody? You're listening to Lo-Fi Faith with Mike and James.
We're two guys who also happen to be pastors, doing our best to have open conversations about what it means to follow Jesus in today's world. Welcome back, everyone, to the Lo-Fi Faith podcast. I'm here with Jimmy Boy, also known as James.
Mikey!
Jimmy!
Hey, good to see you, Mikey.
Good to see you, man. What's been going on?
Actually, I just got back from a basketball tournament.
Oh, yeah, the North New Zealand social... Well, you were in the social league, right?
You didn't have to say that, but I was in the social league of a tournament.
Our viewers needed, our listeners needed to know that it wasn't really competitive. It was more of a social thing. But anyway.
You know, I would like to say that competitive is in the mind of the beholder. And I agree, it wasn't competitive for my team because we did go undefeated. I'm just saying we went 5-0.
So you're saying you were trying really hard while others were just there to have fun?
I would say that's an accurate portrayal of the events. Yeah, I actually left it all on the court, and everyone else was like, bro, we're just hanging out.
Personally, I think that's the only way to go. Yeah, if I was in your shoes, I would have done exactly the same thing. So I affirm your choices there.
Yeah, thank you for that. It was a great time. We had a lot of fun, and it was nice. It's my first time actually getting to spend time on the North Island. And everybody was really great to me. So fun time. Shout out to North New Zealand Conference, Seventh-day Adventist Basketball Youth Rally Tournament.
Awesome, man. Sounds like a lot of fun. So you were the star import for South New Zealand.
No, I was the only import.
The only import, okay. Well, I mean, when you're the only import, I think you can claim the star title. I think it counts.
My whole goal was to not make the South Island and the U.S. look bad. Okay. Which I do believe I achieved. I
would have to take your word for it because I wasn't there.
Yeah, and I'm not going to let you ask anybody who was there.
Okay.
But what I can tell you is I started on the bench and I only got like 5 to 7 minutes, and I ended as a starting member of the team. Game 5, I played almost every minute. I mean, really, really valuable minets out there.
Okay, man. So you worked your way up from bench warmer to starter, basically.
And that's just mindset, Mike.
Yeah, okay.
That's just the grind. That's just really putting in the work.
You know, we might need to have a whole podcast episode on that mentality that you epitomized in the social league there, in the basketball tournament.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Because our listeners need to know about that. I need to know about that.
People need to know.
How do we go from sitting on the bench in life to starting and starring?
I'm going to write that down. I'm gonna, next time I preach, that's probably going to be what it's
Write it down and then immediately delete it.
100%. Yeah. Already deleted.
Yeah. I've already deleted my southern accent from my own memory, and that we did in the first episode, and have decided never, ever, ever to do that into a microphone ever again.
I'm going to be honest. That's an answer to prayer.
Okay.
And not just mine. Numerous prayers.
Yes. I've had many text messages and phone calls about that. I've learned, and we all make mistakes in life, and we just have to grow from them. So
yeah, some more than others. So I'm just really grateful for your capacity to grow.
Yeah.
Wasn't sure where that was at.
Yeah. No, well, there you go. I've just given an example of that.
Follow Lo-Fi Faith with Mike and James on Instagram to keep up with new episodes, behind-the-scenes content, and to join in on the conversation.
Hey, well, good to hear a little bit about what's been going on in your world, and this episode is basically a part 2 from last time, where it was mostly about me last time, wasn't it? We got a little bit of an introduction to my background. And also my faith journey, how I got into, a church environment and my experiences there in a more legalistic setting, and also what kind of led to my deconstructing and exiting of that way of living out my faith. And in this episode, James, we are going to turn the tables. Literally, we are sitting on opposite sides of the table from last time. And now you, my friend, are going to be in the hot seat.
This is This is a moment I've been waiting for a long time. I would say in most of our conversations, we've had to really just talk about you, and so it's kind of nice.
Which I do prefer.
It's kind of nice to make it about me just this one time.
Yeah, it's hard for me to go there, but I'm happy to make one exception and make it about
The
you
only
just
one.
this one time.
Yeah,
this
the
is
only
the
one.
this is the only time this is happening. So you better take full advantage of
Yeah,
it.
the next 900 episodes will actually just be about you and your life. So I am grateful that you're giving me 20 minutes.
No need. Well, actually, no. I was going to say no need to thank me, but I do actually think
Yeah.
the thanks is
Yeah.
warranted in this
Yeah.
case. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
thank you
Yeah.
in advance, and we'll see how much of this you cut out. And
Probably all of it, but
Okay.
that's We'll see. We'll see. Now, you actually asked me just before we get into it. You asked me a question about music last time, and I gave a little insight into my current musical preferences. Now, you, James, have a very interesting relationship with music. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what is the project that you're working on musically? Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
oh man, yeah. So I have always been someone who's drawn to music. I think it is such an interesting insight into people's worlds that different styles of music is often really tied to people's cultures, people's ways of life, the way they see the world. And so, yeah, whenever I am working on some admin stuff or just, things that don't take a whole lot of extra focus on the music, I've been working through literally just every genre of music known to humanity. And it has been a wild ride. I mean, like from Arabic pop to let's see, Bhangra music, which of course the listeners know. I don't even need to explain what that is.
Of course. Yeah.
Went through a little calypso phase for a couple weeks,
We all do.
as one does. So yeah, no, it's been a very interesting project, and I'm doing it really to try to understand people and to understand and broaden my own understanding of music. It's been a really cool project.
Yeah, and just in the little bit that you see there, I hope our listeners can get a sense of the breadth of just how much of an undertaking this actually is. I mean, you went through, you've done the country genre, haven't you, at this point?
I am not proud of this, but I have listened, I believe, to nearly every country music artist with an official album release.
And how long did that take?
Well over a year.
Well over a year, yeah. So that's one genre. So I just want our listeners to understand how large this undertaking is that James is going through right now.
Yeah,
but full respect, and music says a lot about people. You can learn a lot about different cultures and expressions of all kinds of things through music. So I'm sure it's a very interesting experience and probably very educational as well.
Yeah, occasionally quite painful.
Also that.
But in general, it's actually been really, really cool. I've learned a lot about all kinds of different worlds and all kinds of different styles of music. And it's helped me to relate to people quite a bit.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's move along. Let's get into the meat of this episode. James, from what I gather, we have had some similar experiences. Our stories are definitely not the same, but there's maybe a similar trajectory in terms of maybe where we kind of started in faith versus where we are now, or at least there's some parallels there. But tell us a little bit just about your spiritual background, just growing up, and how you were first kind of introduced to this idea of Christianity, following Jesus, etc.
Yes. So when I was born, I'm the fourth of 5 kids. Shout out to the Mellows, all of them. And my dad at that time was a pastor. He was actually a pastor of 4 churches. And so I came up early on in church, way out in rural Maine, northeastern United States. And it was an interesting experience. This was a very conservative setting, very, very traditional setting. And there were some things that I really appreciated about it. There was this sense of community and a really tight-knit group of people. And at the same time, unfortunately, my earliest recollections of church and of faith were really, unfortunately, pretty negative. Not necessarily at home, but at the church. We, as kids, as pastors' kids, there was a lot of pressure on us. And we were not a typical pastor's family.
Mm-hmm.
We were messy. And we were just, we were normal human beings, I guess you could say. And so because of that, we didn't meet the expectations sometimes of the church members. And so I experienced, at least in my own perception, I don't know what it actually was, but how I perceived it growing up was this sort of fear-based mentality where if you don't behave in certain ways, God isn't going to like you. And also, as a church, we aren't either. And so there was definitely, I was thinking about this coming in today. I remember one time when I was at, I think, like a junior camp, like a summer camp. And I remember being at the campfire and thinking about eternity. But because of how I perceived God at that time, eternity was terrifying. Like, because I wasn't really comfortable with who God was, I wasn't really comfortable with living forever with that kind of God.
Yeah.
And I was really young. I mean, I'm thinking back, I must have been like 8 or 9. And just being really scared of the idea of eternity and not wanting to live forever.
So already at that time, you'd taken on a certain view of God, a certain perception of God that was impacting you in real ways.
Yeah.
Not particularly healthy ways.
Yeah. So there was a lot of shame there and a lot of fear. I had a lot of anxiety as a kid for several different reasons, not all spiritually related. Our family was a loving family, but had a lot of history. My parents had a lot of history growing up that was not easy for them to handle. So that culminated in the parents getting divorced and my life just completely changing. My mom took us 5 kids at that time, 1,200 miles away, and we sort of restarted our lives. And that was really hard at that age. I was, I think, 11 or 12. Really hard for me to know how to approach that. Like, what does this mean? What does this mean about God? I had all these ideas in my head that, God's people don't get divorced. And so if we got divorced, that means that God quit on us or we quit on him or something. And so I was really angry at my mom, really angry at my dad, really angry at God. I just stepped away entirely from religion. Now, my mom was a church person. So she made us go to church. So I was still in church on a regular basis, but mentally I was checked out.
So you were there reluctantly. You were there because you had to be.
100%. I was forced to be there. It was very clear that I was forced to be there. I did not have a choice in it. And again, shout out to my mom. She was doing what she thought was right.
Of course.
And I don't blame her. And I was young. If she's going to church, I have to go to church with her. But for me personally, I built up this wall. Because I was mad about the situation I found myself in, I was like, all right, Christians are judgmental, they're hypocrites, they're robots. I don't want to be a Christian. I don't even want anything to do with God. I kind of still believed there was a God, but I didn't want anything to do with him. So I actively avoided him for several years through my the majority of my teen years and really became quite self-destructive. And we don't have to get into it today, but I got to this point where I was so self-destructive, I was really considering whether or not I wanted to continue living. And at that time, I had this really profound religious experience, and it impacted me in such a way that I couldn't ignore it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so just to put some pieces together, so you were raised in a Christian environment. Obviously went through the difficult experience of your parents getting divorced. That threw you. You wanted nothing to do with God, and now you're saying at some point later you had a very powerful religious experience, and did that facilitate your entry back into a church context, a believing context?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and it was in a different denomination that I'd grown up in.
Okay.
And so that experience, which happened ironically at another summer camp that I didn't want to be at, but I had to go there because it was the only way for me to get back to my home. I was in a different state and I needed to get home, and they offered me a free ride home if I went to camp. So I'm like, all right, sure. So
As you do.
as one does.
Yep.
So I showed up at the camp, really turned off to the whole thing, really fought God through the whole week, but I just couldn't ignore that there was something out of control in my life. And there was a peace that I did not have that I deeply wanted. And I got to this mentality where it's like, well, I've tried everything else pretty much. Like I was way out in the world, as they say. I've tried everything else. I might as well just give this God thing a go, right? Why not? And so I did. I opened myself up to God, and got worse afterwards for a while.
Okay.
I went home, got baptized, and then immediately just kind of fell apart. And it was almost like I had this awakened conscience that I didn't have before, where I had this sense of right and wrong that I didn't care about before, but I was still doing all the things I was doing before. So it was like I felt more shame now than I did before.
Yeah, okay.
And I had this previous view of God, right? Like that God doesn't like me because I'm doing the things that he doesn't like. So therefore he doesn't like me. I must not, be worthwhile to him or whatever. So a long series of events, I want to skip ahead, I guess, because I don't want to stay here. But basically what ended up happening was at some point I started reading the Bible for myself for the first time really my entire life. And it really changed my preconceptions. It challenged a lot of the things that I had thought about who God was and about these other things. I had tons of questions about it, but I really appreciated it. And that got me to a place where I really trusted the goodness of God, right? That there is a loving, benevolent being that literally is willing to bankrupt everything on my behalf, even as I'm actively giving him the middle finger in my life. And it was like, wow, okay, that's the kind of person I want to be around. I can appreciate that type of absolute unconditional love and grace, as we call it in the church.
For sure.
And so that changed me. And all of a sudden I wanted to live a little bit differently, but I also just wanted other people to have that same type of peace and all of that stuff. Eventually that led me to this place where as I was reading the Bible, I had this deep faith in God. And also at the same time, I was starting to say, well, okay, what we're believing in this church that I was in, I'm not sure I see all of that in the scriptures, right? And I really wanted to follow what the scriptures said. So that led me on this kind of journey where I ended up going back to the church that I grew up in, actually literally the same physical church that I grew up in, and got reintroduced to a lot of the concepts that I came up in to begin with. And some of it, I was like, oh man, this church really has this high view of the Bible, and it's clarifying things that I had questions about. I didn't really understand why there was this idea of the secret rapture, and so I was looking into it, and I didn't see it in Scripture. And then this church was showing how that's not necessarily, a scriptural idea. It comes from other places. And anyway, long story short, with all of that, I decided to go back into that church setting, and that was really, really great in some ways for the high level of Bible knowledge I was getting. Like I got more intellectually, I felt like sound.
Sure.
But it also disrupted some of my spiritual growth.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to ask you about, right? Because you've mentioned that you came to a point where you had now a more positive view of God, a God who loves, a God who's very accepting, even if you're, as you eloquently put it, giving him the middle finger, a God who still cares. So if we segue a little bit at this point, because this is part 2 of a couple of episodes entitled "I Used to Be a Legalist." How then did you go from having a more positive view of God, who is caring and loving, to a place of, I think you would also acknowledge, a place of spiritual legalism? How did that transition take place?
Yeah, so in the church there is this sort of tension that we see all throughout Scripture, and then we have to interpret it as Christians ourselves. This difference or this tension between the law and grace, right? And so grace is this idea that we are receiving unmerited favor from God, that we're given something that we don't deserve just as a gift, right? Salvation is a gift. That's what Ephesians tells us. All over the Bible tells us this. And yet there is this law that's all throughout Scripture, this unchangeable set of principles that God is calling us to live up to. And what happened was I got with this group of people who really wanted to emphasize this side of obedience, right? Because they were really worried about cheap grace, right? Like, okay, so God loves you so you can then go be permissive and do whatever you want.
Sure.
And so they said, well, that's not really what it means to follow Jesus. If you really follow Jesus, it's going to lead into obedience, which I agree with. It's true. But what ended up happening was it started emphasizing obedience at the cost of almost everything else. Like what God really wanted was obedience to the law. And that was like the primary, foremost focus for every human creature. And if you didn't obey, yes, there's grace for you if you accidentally disobey, right? But I started being told, like, there's no grace for you if you're intentionally disobedient. And it was almost like we had this idea where I was like, come as you are into the church. But if you don't change once you're in the church,
Yep.
all that come as you are is gone.
Yep.
It's like, come as you are until you get here. Now change who you are.
Yeah. Once you sign on the dotted line, so to speak,
Yeah.
now it's no longer we accept you as you are. Now you need to live up to our own certain expectations.
Yes, and I think that's a key part of it is our own expectations.
Yep.
So what ended up happening was I was trying to live up to what I was being told as God's expectations of me all the time. And I tried really, really hard. And the fruit of it, much like you said in the last episode, the fruit of it was just increasing anxiety, increasing shame, not only of myself, but also of other people. Whereas like the closer I got to my picture of what righteousness was, the more I saw other people not striving for that same level of righteousness. And so I would feel ashamed for them.
Yeah.
Or my friend groups, my intimate relationships, I'm putting all this pressure on them. Hey, look, I'm doing this. Why aren't you guys doing this?
Yeah, you can't help but notice where other people fall short in your own eyes, and you feel frustrated, and you want to point out those imperfections, right? I know very much what you're talking about.
Yeah. And so basically in trying to correct for an idea of cheap grace, we overcorrected into this place where grace really didn't play a factor. We would give lip service to it, but it didn't actually play a factor in the way that we approached God.
Okay.
It was like this expectation that the further you get in this walk, the less you're going to need grace. And the more that you can sort of rely on your own standing.
Yeah. So really just a real overemphasis on the obedience, law, legal side of Christianity and of living out one's faith. And
Yeah, because ultimately what was happening was I stopped taking my eyes off of Jesus as the savior of my life, right? And I started focusing on me
inwardly.
As the fulfillment as best I could of God's law as I understood it. And by doing that, I'm literally taking my eyes off of salvation and putting my hope in myself instead of in Jesus, and realizing that, oh man, I'm falling way short of where I'm supposed to be. So I'm getting more and more despondent, more depressed as this is happening, and more judgmental and critical at the same time.
You're listening to Lo-Fi Faith with Mike and James. So that's, I mean, you put that really well, and having been in a similar place, I know how difficult that can be as you're dealing with your own expectations of where you want to be, with the reality of you kind of falling short of that, and the anxiety that creates, and all of those things. It was it the mental anguish side of things that facilitated your maybe your deconstruction or your exit from that way of thinking and that way of living out your faith? Or what was it that facilitated maybe a new perspective on faith? What led you in that direction?
Yeah, it was a number of things. One was starting to realize that no matter how fundamentalist I got, for lack of a better word, like no matter how much I tried to make this black and white thinking work, there was always real life that got in the way, right? Like, some people would tell you, well, this is a sin, but then they would also be doing something that I'd been told by someone else was a sin. And right? Like, so what I found is, like, no matter how deep down you went, there was always another level to go. And I realized it's really never ending, right? Like, because the whole point of it is to draw you further and further into your own selfish actions, right? And what happened is I became less service-oriented. I became less focused on helping other people because I was too much focused on just being right. And so I realized, like, this is not sustainable. And on top of that, I started realizing that for other people, they were like, the fruits of it was not love, joy, peace, and patience, and so on. I think we talked about this in the last episode too.
We did.
That the fruits of this really was more and more negativity, and again, what I would describe as an unsustainable way of living. That I had the wrong mentality in my life, and so because of that, it wasn't going to do any good. I went through this theological program that was really good at preparing me intellectually for being a pastor, But then I became a pastor, and I tried to do everything that they had taught me to do. Not just the theology, but also like how to live my life, like suit and tie and looking just right and saying the right spiritual words and these sorts of things. And I was bearing like no fruit. Like, and by that I mean like people just were not really resounding with what I was saying, and I was questioning whether or not I was supposed to be in ministry at all. And so there was a transition in my ministry. I went from 2 churches, then I went to go be a chaplain and a Bible teacher at a school. And I was like, all right, you know what, this time I'm gonna be myself. Even if it doesn't fit all of these preconceived notions, I'm gonna be a real person for once and just test it out and see how it works. And all of a sudden I was having these incredible deep spiritual conversations with people who were far from God, but they were interested in talking with me. And it got to the point where, like, man, people were asking to get baptized. People were really excited about following Jesus. And I realized at that time, and among a number of other things, that the more that I just focused on abiding, just living and dwelling in the love of God, that it does change me. It does bring me to a place of obedience in my life internally, but it's not going to fit every box. It's going to disappoint people's perceptions of me. But man, it was such a peaceful place to be compared to where I'd come from.
Awesome, man. Hey, thank you so much for that, Jimmy Boy, for giving us a little overview of your journey. I know there's so much more. We don't have the time to go into it, but I appreciate that little bite-sized overview that you've given us. And we're going to be fleshing out a lot of these concepts in future episodes as well. So, with fundamentalism, with some of these terms that we've thrown out there, we haven't necessarily explained them, but we want to get more into the impact of these things and look at some healthier alternatives and maybe speak a little bit more about our journeys and what we've learned. So, hey, thanks, James, for introducing our listeners to you and for giving us a bit of a sense of where you've come from, who you are, how you got to where you are today.
Thanks for hanging out with us on Lo-Fi Faith. If something resonated with you today, we'd love it if you shared the show with a friend.
You can catch up on past episodes at plains.org.nz and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We'll be back with a fresh episode in 2 weeks.
See you then.